I'm going to begin on a note of dissent, which, by the way, none of my panelists agree on, but I'm going to start because at least it's going to get the conversation going. And so, what I asked them in the green room is this. I mean, surely every book is about place. I mean, it's the one of the most essential components of whenever anyone starts to write, and in fact, not just fiction but also nonfiction. And so, surely every writer, in the very act of writing, conveys the spirit of place. That it's what breathing is to life. The sense of place is to writing. And in fact, we were trying to think of books that don't convey sense of place or deliberately kind of erase the feelings and the particularities of place, and there's very, very few. So I'm going to ask Geoff to respond to that, and then thereon.
Yeah, thank you. Well, what a great pleasure to be in this particular place again, actually. And yeah, I mean, I'll start by just throwing in something which I found so interesting. This photographer called Michael Ackerman. Some of you might know he's best known for his photographs of Varanasi, a book called End Time City. And for a photographer, and then in a subsequent book of his photographs called Fictions, he says, as far as I'm concerned, places don't exist, which is an extraordinary thing for a photographer to say, because you're documenting what's there. You're not inventing as you can with a book. Then he says rather brilliantly, as far as I'm concerned, a place is just my idea of it. And so, I mean, it seems to me that's an extraordinary thing to try to do in photographs, to kind of denude the photograph of a lot of the information that it contains. And then in fiction, and I'm sort of setting this up just to sort of frame the conversation, in contradiction to that, I think of one of the great writers about place, Annie Dillard. In one of her essays in Teaching a Stone to Talk, she says, there's two things. She says, she never saw a tree that was no tree in particular. And of course, a tree, more than anywhere else, more than anything else, is rooted, tied to a place. And then she asks us to remember that life is always and only lived in the particular. So it's always got to be about place. And if you're writing fiction, a novel, the novel has tended, with a few exceptions, and because my mind has gone completely blank, I'll leave it to my co-panelists to remind us which ones they are. I mean, novels are always inextricably linked to the social landscape. Therefore, place is very important.
Is that for me? Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this place. As Geoff says, I quite agree with... I don't think one can write placelessly, really. And I think about my own writing and whether I could make place less of a thing. And I don't think I can. Even if I think about the themes in my writing, say dislocation, where are you going from? What are you going to? What are the emotions tied up with those places? What is the spirit of a place? I mean, the easy answer in my case in Guyana, it is dark rum, which is also the spirit of Bombay, a different brand. I was speaking with the great writer Vivek Shanbag before this, and he said language is place as well. And that got me thinking. I'm thinking about Bombay. Bombay has so many words for problems, for how things go wrong. Lafda, locha, golmal, garbad, vanda. That's telling you about not the physicality of a place, not the landmarks, but what's on people's mind. I'm thinking about the language of Guyana. The word for dawn in Guyana is a gorgeous word. It's called day clean. Like the day washing the night clean. And towards the end of the day, you don't have darkness descending on you. You have darkness gone catch we. Darkness is this thing that's coming for you, So it's so alive with the idea of language conjuring the spirit of place. It's not a sweltering day in Guyana, it's the sun hot boy. And someone will say, heat hot boy. So the quality of the heat is hot. It is telling me about the weather in Guyana through language. I mean, to me, all of these things make the spirit of a place. I mean, just to finish, your original question, the only example I could think about from my recent readings, Something that didn't have a sense of place was probably Beckett's Endgame, which has characters on a stage like popping up from a garbage can. One's father is a horse. It's so deliberately absurdist and surrealist. The place doesn't really matter. But that's a play, it's not a novel, as Geoff says, and we'll let them elaborate.
So, Rana, do you agree that you can't, on the whole, it's really hard not to write the things that, like, Rahul's just pointed out, all the things that kind of inspire you are really from your surroundings, which means place. Geoff tells us that, in all of creativity, it is what that photographer was talking about, is subjective. And that, you're standing there and it's that person's impressions of the world around him that they convey in their work, not the physical place. But it returns to this thing is that, what are you writing about? What you convey? You convey what's around you, you convey place. Can you even ever be placeless?
Yeah, I mean, you have your own as well, right? Oh, I have my own. I think it's on.
Is this working? Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the obvious things that you do as a writer in trying to set up any story or whatever is to describe place. And many of the great storytellers, again, my mind goes blank, but I think of Martin Scorsese, who's devoted his entire life to telling stories of New York City. This is what makes that skill is a sensitivity to place, the spirit of the place, as the title of this panel says. And so I've written many city books, and all of them start by trying to understand what kind of knowledge do you have to enter this place. So in some places you enter and you have to be aware of the epic, like New York City, like Bombay. These are cities which come with a massive mythology. And to enter that place and to know anything about it, to function there, you have to enter that mythology. But other places whisper at you, and some places whisper obscenities at you, because the histories of those places are about tragedies and traumas. And if you are not privy to that private knowledge, those whispered things, those silences, then you can't enter that place or be intimate with it. But as somebody in my own life who's spent my entire adult life running away from my own place, from the country I was born in, there is also in my writing an intense desire to escape place completely. And it's interesting what you said at the beginning, because Kafka is one of the most influential writers, people that marked me and inspired me to write, and he writes things that happen in a non-place. And my first book was very influenced by a French theorist called Marc Auger, who wrote a book called Non-Place, and where he focused on all those places that are not part of the normal geography of people's lives, the shopping malls, highways, graveyards, underpasses, these places that are not places and that have the same character anywhere in the world. And my book was set in an airport where people are sort of stranded for a night, and in that place that is not a place, it's not even in a country, it's duty-free, as the first line of my book says. They are free to exchange cosmopolitan stories. And so even throughout my career, I've been sort of wrestling between being rooted, being interested in a location, being interested in the particular inflections of a place and a language and a sensibility, and the desire to escape all that and think about what is shared, what is universal, what is not burdened by the absurdities of place, which are sometimes so banal that we should not get so hung up on them.
And they're also, at the same time, the way Rahul just described Guyana, they're also the things that make some place, or a person, the particularities is also in them, right? Ruchir, where do you stand on this?
Well, for me, the elephant in the room is time, that moment in history. Because I've written 2 books. The first book, some of you may know it, it's a history of a family from 1930 to 2030, but the book was published in 2001. So at that point, 30 years were yet to come. And across that time, the book moves from Ahmedabad to Calcutta to Bombay to Delhi to Paris, New York. And in a sense, it's not a book that's anchored in one place, except perhaps slightly Calcutta. What happens is it also moves across time, which people found disorienting at some time and sometimes quite exhilarating. The second book, which has just come out, Great Eastern Hotel, is very rooted, goes deeper and deeper into one particular period of time, Second World War in Calcutta. And it is about Calcutta, even if Calcutta is being looked at from the outside or from the inside, from that moment in time or from 30 years later. So for me, time and place are kind of inextricable, because as I started to research Calcutta of that time, I hadn't lived through that time, obviously, despite what Rahul was suggesting. I wasn't alive in the 1940s. I realized how different that place must have been. When I was talking to people, doing my research, it was like that Calcutta is still recognizable in some physical forms and shapes, but actually that sensibility, how people interacted, the codes, the whisperings, the obscenities have all changed, you know. In my first book, the main character is a protagonist, is a photographer. And again, with his photographs, he kind of anchors himself to a place and moves out of a place. In the second book, there's a painter who can't get away from depicting that time even many years later. So that time changes, and when I look back at the time that I've lived through my city, there's layers and layers and layers and layers of Calcuttas or Bombays or Delhis that one has seen across time. If you live long enough, you get that feeling of different places. The old Bombay, the old Calcutta, the old Delhi has disappeared, right? As has, I'm sure, the old London and Paris. So for me, where you get the intersection between place and time is what I think catches the spirit, because the spirit of the place 50 years ago, 60 years ago is not the spirit of the place now. I mean, I'm just looking at Jaipur, which I used to visit as a schoolboy, and it's completely unrecognizable, even though some of the trees and some of the smells are still the same.
So I'm going to, what we're all saying is that you can't run away from place, right? I mean, Rana tries, but he has to come back. If you can't run away from place, when your notebook is blank and you begin to think about your book, how important has been the place in the first sort of working through of what this thing you're going to write about is? I mean, in some of your cases, Rana, in Capital, of course, Delhi's the hero, Delhi's the protagonist. But for the rest of you, what comes first? And what I'm trying to get at is, does place just sort of slip in through the door? Because there are other things that are in capturing the other essential things to your work, place sort of just gets pinned down? Geoff?
Well, yeah, this is all so interesting, and I think I love Rana. I love that book that Rana mentioned by Mark Oge. It's quite interesting, and we're all increasingly at home in these non-places. But one of the things I'm always struck by, they're very, very well staffed, these non-places at airports. And I'm aware that it's a real old bore when we have to go through to get airside, and we do it grumpily and acceptingly. But I'm always very conscious there's a load of people working in the duty-free shop, local people, who every day have to go through a border check just to get to their place of work. So there really is no getting away from it with them. I'm also completely in agreement about this idea of the intersection of time and place. And I'm thinking, because I write non-fiction as well as fiction, and I think, the most vivid experience I had of this, I was in France, living in Paris. I thought to write a book about Paris. And then I went to visit the cemeteries on the Western Front, because, of course, the First World War is a big thing for any British person. And so I go there, and, of course, I'm aware that there's this place called the Somme. It's both a département of France and it's a river. But it's also a place where, this cataclysmic day occurred in British history, where on the 1st of July 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, there were 60,000 British and Commonwealth casualties in one day. So it's a cataclysmic day. And I wasn't sure what I'd find there. And in fact, there was this immense monument there with just these words inscribed on it, the missing of the Somme. And it's a memorial to the 60,000 dead. It's a coincidence that it's the same number, who in the course of the battle that lasted 4 months, their bodies were never found, or they'd just been, they were either unidentified or they'd just been sort of vaporized. And there you get it so clearly, this intersection of a place, the Somme, and an event, one particular, this battle that took place. And for me, I'm always so interested in these places where the temporal is manifested in the geographic, or where time is manifested as place, and where the two are actually become inextricably linked.
And I want to just, I'm going to just do a follow-up question. I remember in the green room, Rana said, actually talking about your memoir that you recently published, that it has a very strong sense of place. And the question I wanted to ask is that, in that book, was sense of place just a byproduct of writing other things with a kind of detail and memory and attention, and place would come out of that naturally? Or was it much more conscious?
Oh, it's the book is. I mean, when I was first thinking of how to write it, I conceived it as a map. So it's absolutely about place, And the thing is, that particular place, places don't exist. I'm just repeating now. Places don't exist independently of time. So that particular place, for me, is also a period of time. That is to say, from 1958 to 1977.
Rahul.
Place is absolutely vital for me as a starting point, has been in this. My first book was literally a travel book, a cricket tour book. So you're going from place to place and writing about that. The second one, Sly Company, was set in Guyana, and the place inspired me to go there and just deal with all the things Guyana had triggered inside me at various levels. How curious I was about it. And I felt like I need to kind of process this, get it out of my system almost, by living there and finding a way to write about it. Place was a starting point. The new novel, Rail Song, the two principal geographical locations in this novel, one is a fictional railway township in the 1960s. I completely agree with what Ruchir and Geoff have been saying about time and place. The second physical location, geographical location, is Bombay of the 1970s and 80s. But interestingly, the most important place, the spiritual place of this novel, is actually the Indian Railways. And how do you inhabit a place like this? It's an entity, it's a bureaucratic enterprise. It is also a set of rail lines that connects India. It is a human network that connects Indians. How do I kind of work this into the logic of my novel so that it's not a thing that's sitting on top of it, but it's literally a kind of the main artery of the novel. So the railways are metaphors for India in so many different ways. But in the most kind of, obviously in this context, is you are going from place to place. So what are you going away from? Why are you going? What are you going to? What are your compulsions? What are your ambition, dreams, whatever that is? In terms of the specific sites, 1960s, the railway township, of course, I've made maps as well of the quarters, the government quarters, what the township might look like, done my reading, all of that. But what is the special energy of that township? It is that Indians are now organized in this post-independent township around a workshop, very different from the traditional forms of social organization along languages of caste or religion, language, etc. Here you're organized by rank. It's culturally alienating in some ways, but it also captures the spirit of post-independence Nehruvian India of the scientific temper. So then what is the kind of disquiet in a place like that? Then when she goes to Bombay, I had a reader yesterday telling me that she went from Australia to Bollywood. I said, so were you a struggler? She said, yes, I was a struggler. Struggler is the term for aspirants who go to Bombay in order to become film stars, typically by train, and you go there. And there's this great line in Bombay, said, when the struggler says, in Bombaya Hindi, mera struggling jari hai. like my struggling is ongoing. It suggests this struggling will end, and at the end of the struggle, I mean, I will be a film star. And I think this is true not just for, I told the reader, well, Charu, who's not a film aspirant, is also a struggler. Because people go to Bombay for that all the time, always have, still do, to become a kind of film star in your own life. So the idea, the spirit of Bombay, the spirit behind the place of Bombay is then also this, the idea of coming there to make something of yourself.
Rana, I'm going to ask you a different question, which occurred to me as I was sort of sitting in this panel. That many of you, I think, actually all of you, have written about very different places. That is not the places you were born in, right? It hasn't been the places you worked in, or you've gone out and imagined being in different places and made that. So in your case, of course, Bulgaria being the big one. Ruchir has sort of written about all kinds of places. Rahul's written about Guyana. Geoff's written, well, his novel had kind of twinned Venice and Varanasi. And the reason I want to ask this is that, of course, this seems perfectly natural to you. But the idea that people can write about very different places from where they came from is a new thing. I mean, when I think about, Geoff, when I think about Indian writers, I think even 20, 25 years ago, I'm not sure Indians wrote about India, right? Or the Indian American wrote about America, or Indians in America. But in many ways, you guys have sort of let your imaginations go unfettered. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, this was a political act to some extent. I mean, when I finished my first book, I had sold a 2-book deal in several countries, and the second book was definitely going to be a novel, and all my editors assumed it was going to be a novel about India, and that irritated the hell out of me, because I felt like I'd been pre-programmed to do things, and so I told them I was going to write a novel about Bulgaria instead. And this was a place that I had zero connection with. It could not possibly be some kind of...
Rana, let me interrupt. Was it literally just an idea that came to your mind and you just emailed your agent and Bulgaria was the first
No,
place
I
you
was
saw on
already
the map?
obsessed with Bulgaria, but for various reasons. But I was obsessed with it partly because I think that I've always been interested in the places you're not supposed to write about. Like whenever I was traveling for Tokyo Council and someone would say, don't go there, there's nothing there, then I knew that was the place where I would find my story. But I want to say something else in response to what you're saying, because I think you're right that the people on this stage and maybe writers as a general global class are mobile. They are, and mobility is part of their life. We're all here in Jaipur and most of us don't live here. And so in some senses, literature becomes the kind of class culture of the mobile people of the world, which is to say the elites of the world. And I, this last year, wrote with my partner Mariam Maslani a podcast called Harvest, which was about cotton farmers in Maharashtra. And as we were sort of planning with Audible the sort of structure of this, she and I insisted that the voice can never leave the village because the people in the village cannot leave. These are not mobile people. And the podcast itself should not shift between sort of Washington and London and have all these different voices, because we need to feel that sense of being... The first episode of the podcast concerns a cousin who murders a cousin. And they share a plot, and the two families live through a wall, and no one can go. They all have to get on with their lives afterwards and see each other every day. And so I think that I'm more recently in my life, I'm sort of focusing on the two poles. One is the total placelessness of political thought. How do we as a species manage ourselves with respect to ecology, politics, war, independently of who we are, what our background and nationality is, and all those sort of things. And at the other end of the equation, the half of the human race who never leave, who are, by virtue of our political system, immobilized and kept in place so that the economic system can leave, can work so that an elite class can fly around the world and do their thing. So I'm not so interested now as before in all this literature of airports and hotels and all those things that I was interested in earlier. I now think that there are other questions to think about with regard to place.
Though I would sort of come back at you and say that you define let's say the us and them, the world of elites and non-elites, is those who can move and those who can't. We know, of course, that the world of the poor often leave. I mean, the great political debates of today are around migration of the poor who are forced out of their homes because, of course, they would rather probably stay home. But so what I mean to say is that I don't think you can really define travel as the way to kind of define the elite and the non-elite.
Yeah, but they don't go through airports very often.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
yes, they have a completely different. Absolutely, they are mobile, but it's a very different signs of mobility that they are theirs. So of course that is super interesting, and that's enormous news. But that travel is often, yes, forced and illegal and dangerous. It's not at all the kind of travel
No,
that I
of
started
course
my
not.
career writing
Yeah.
about.
Ruchir, one of the themes of this conversation has been the idea that you introduced, that place isn't place without time. And there's another idea that's kind of unconscious, which is that it's not just place isn't place without time, but that in the end, it's the writer's subjectivity that makes it come alive, right? Which is that wonderful quote that Geoff gave us at the beginning from that photographer. And your Calcutta really feels like that. That it, of course, it's Calcutta in the wartime. It's Calcutta in the 40s, but it feels like it's been conjured out of your whole spirit, rather than just. I mean, of course, I know that it's probably historically grounded, etc. But I wonder what you would say to that.
Well, a couple of ideas occurred to me in response to this. I mean, not necessarily in sequence, but the thing that Geoff said about a tree, that there's no tree that isn't a particular tree. The Calcutta I talk about is pre-partition Kolkata, right? Which is a Muslim majority city, actually, at that point, slightly, 51 to 49% kind of thing. And partition cleaves that into two. And when you get the partition narratives from people on both sides of the border, and also in Punjab, sometimes very often the tree that they left behind, or the little pond or the river, that symbolizes, and they miss that, right? And that theme is suddenly cropped up again in different shapes and forms here, where Anuradha Roy was talking about an oak plant that somebody sent her from England that is now growing in Ranikhet. Somebody else was talking about the tree in the previous session with Naman and Willie, about the tree that was sent from the one of the places and one of the Buddhist pilgrimage places to another, it's like a descendant of that tree. So I think sometimes you carry a place with you or carry a memory of a place. And as a writer, what occurs to me is, it's funny, because I was thinking about Rana and me. Rana left England. All the books that he's done, he hasn't written much about England, which he surely knows really well. I, from my side, between 1990 and 2019, I was half a North Londoner, as I was a Delhiite or a Calcutta person, bringing up two kids, living in London, dealing with stuff half the year, every year, sometimes more. I've not got a single short story or bit of fiction about London for that time. And for a lot of that time, I was writing about this imaginary Kolkata, Calcutta, right?
Richard, can I butt in and say why?
I don't know. I mean, somehow I have traveled, but somehow, as Marco Polo says to the Khan in Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, I can tell you about every city, but every city is Venice. Every city starts with Venice, right? And so for me, somehow, while hating Calcutta, criticizing it, laughing, being derisive about it, I sort of carried Calcutta everywhere I've gone. And both my novels have had to, been anchored to Calcutta. And my promise is that the next thing, whatever I write, fiction, will not be historical and be not about Calcutta. I mean, it's this negative thing that I'm taking forward because I'm done with it for the time being. But it's also how writers process things, right? So it's about, you can maybe write about a place from another place. Again, time again is something that you carry with you. So that I could write about a certain time in the past now when I couldn't then. So maybe I can write about London now that I'm no longer living there. That's another dynamic that writers, I think, face.
Is there, Geoff, a place like Ruchir that you really should have written about that you haven't?
Well, that's unanswerable, but I'll answer it in a different way to say that in terms of fiction, the first novel I wrote was set in Brixton area of London. Then the next one was set in Paris, Paris Trance it was called. So slightly more glamorous. And then the third novel, Jeff in Venice, Death in Varanasi, that was sort of really getting quite sort of exotic. And at that point, I was pretty close to being finished as a writer of fiction. And perhaps not accidentally, I realized I'd also gone from B to P to V. So I'd got to the sort of end of the road, the end of the alphabet. And anything I wanted to write after that, I think, was going to be, I was aware that, there was, to go back to the beginning of the alphabet, to B's again, the place where I was born, actually, and hence the memoir came out of that. Just to say one more thing, which I completely agree with about this, what you were saying, I think of the great Polish writer Richard Kapuscinski. The first book translated into English, was his book, The Emperor, about the last days of Haile Selassie in Ethiopia. And that was turned into an opera by the great director, impresario Jonathan Miller. And he kept bombarding Kapuscinski with questions about Ethiopia. And rather impatiently, Kapuscinski said, Jonathan, why are you wasting my time with this? What you've got to understand, it's not a book about Ethiopia at all. It's a book about Poland.
Rahul, we're almost at the end, so I'm going to ask you to close this session. But is there a place that you should have written that you have, like Rana, you're avoiding, or like Ruchir?
Funnily, all my 3 books have been written after I've left that place. The cricket tour, of course, of Pakistan. Pakistan is not going to keep me there for a long time. The Sly Company, I wrote that novel after I returned to Delhi, and this railway novel, a lot of Bombay, while I'm living in Delhi. So I think I should want to write about Delhi now. That gives me a really good excuse to leave it, and maybe it's a persuasive reason. I just want to comment on one thing that Ruchi said, which is very beautiful about the movement of trees, because this happened with indentured labor in the Caribbean. They were boarding these ships, going to a place they couldn't even imagine, across the world. And what did they take with them? They took bundles of seeds and handkerchiefs, people trees, katahar, as they call it, kathal, all kinds of trees, and they planted them. And when the people tree is where, in the Caribbean, at least among the Indian community there, they bury the navel string in the yard they have a people tree close by. So I think we have 30 seconds left, but I just want to close on that note.
Nice.
Thank you very much. We're open to questions.
There's a question over there.
One there.
Where? I can't see.
Over there.
Periscope. Yes, over there. Yeah. The man in the black, I can see him. Can other people see him? There you are.
He needs a mic.
The couple there, one there and one there.
A very simple question, actually. I just want to hear from all of you about a novel where you guys felt it captured really well the sense of place. It could be fiction, non-fiction, or imaginary, or based on a real location. Just a book recommendation.
Seasons of Migration to the North, from the North, Taib Salih, and set in Sudan. Tremendously evocative. Edna O'Brien's short story set in rural Ireland. Tremendous sense of place. The Trinidad of Naipaul.
Rana?
Harlem of Nella Larson.
I mean, all of literature.
That was the point of this, yeah.
I've been spending a lot of time in Berlin recently, and I was thinking some of my early inspiration were writers. Well, John le Carre is regarded as a great writer, and Len Deighton not so much, though I think he's great. And I was thinking about Len Deighton's a book called Funeral in Berlin, which he writes in the 1960s about this sort of slightly stupid spy character who's unnamed. There's a sense of place, but there's no sense of a name of this main protagonist. And that Berlin, and then he writes about Berlin again later in a trilogy. And then you get Le Carre's Berlin, and in Spy Who Came In From the Cold and stuff. And I was just thinking about these different Berlins, which gave me a sense of Berlin. And when I got to Berlin, it was yet again a completely different place. So it's interesting how you can get a same city, different snapshots, different points of view, different telephoto lensing or wide-angle lensing, and that's always fascinated me. Paris is another place. Calcutta, of course. Bombay, we can argue about who's got Bombay, who's not got Bombay. Rushdie gets it, a certain Bombay that I don't know in the 50s, 60s, really well in Midnight's Children. But after that, every Bombay he's written about has irritated the hell out of me because I think he doesn't get it. Because he's been living in London writing about, the artist community in Bombay or whatever it is. And it's like, no, man, this is South Bombay. I don't think you get it properly. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say about a great writer. But, I mean, so you have these irritations as well. So, yeah.
What about you, Geoff?
I'm going to give an answer which I'm hoping is going to make me seem clever, and then I'll give a confession. Faulkner, Mississippi, brackets, I've never been able to read Faulkner.
There's one blue there and one there.
There's one in front and there's some in the middle on the right.
Thank you. What you just said is a good segue to my question. I would love a comment on the difference between somebody writing about a place that they know, that they're from, and somebody who's writing as an outsider, because we have a kind of a political correctness, milieu these days, and who gets to tell the story of the place?
I'll take that. Partly because I wrote a big book about a place that was not my own, and I received a lot of flack for it.
Capital?
Capital.
But you were living there, so of course it was your own.
I was living there, and I had a deep relationship with it, but it was not my own place. And India gatekeeps this a lot, right? So whether you are qualified to write about India or not is a matter of public debate. And I felt that I had actually some advantages as an outsider and insider to writing about it. I just want to say one other thing. Look, I've just been having the pleasure of reading Geoff's memoir, Homework. And I think one thing I just want to drop into all of this is childhood. Because children cannot leave. They are anchored in a place, and they are at an age where they're incredibly attentive. They turn over every object and smell every smell. And it's wonderful to read Geoff's memoir and to realize that children are really the best investigators of place, and never again, at no other stage in your life, do you ever pay that much attention. And so there is something, I think, to the people who are from a place, who were born in it. They have something to report that others don't.
Because they invest the proximate with such a sense of foreignness and wonder, right? What's right in front.
Rahul, I mean, some of the best bits in your book are those girls playing in that, your protagonist and her friend playing, they're kind of disappearing. Do they go off somewhere at night and play somewhere in the back?
When they go to see Jitendra, that's a lovely bit there as well.
And you really feel like that's absolutely right, Rana, that they explore their terrain in a way that an adult doesn't. Any questions? There's one in the back, there's one in the front row, and there's one kind of quite in the back on the right-hand side.
Thank you. I was wondering on the same lines that young children, they don't even need to know the language to play with one another. And when you're telling a story for children, often it's based in a room. Cat in the Hat, it's based in a room. How does place play a role in children's stories?
Because that room, sorry, I'm just jumping in. Because that room is the whole world at that point. Everything about that room is so exciting. Everything about your little yard and the 500 meters around it is so fresh. And I mean, it's just such an adventure in each of those movements of yours, the emotions that you invest in it. So the Bangla novel, Pather Panchali, is one of the great novels of place also. The first section of that novel is in the translation is called Children Make Their Own Toys. So when you say you don't need to know the language, you don't, but it's an act of creation almost. You're creating the place through the child's eyes.
I think there's one, right?
Good afternoon. My question is that does the mythology of a place sort of fixes its identity, and do the people of that place represent that identity?
Ruchir, do you want to go?
It can vary. I mean, sometimes, as talking about going in as an outsider, I think sometimes it's great if an outsider comes in and writes about, or films. I mean, film is also one of my big bugbears is all these great European filmmakers making great films in Europe, and the moment they come to India or China, they become like stupid white tourists and make these terrible films. That's always irritated me. Sometimes books are like that, not always. Let me quickly hasten to add, some of them are fantastic, but then there are others. I mean, I remember Catherine Boo got a lot of flack for writing about Bombay and the slums there. Everyone in Bombay, the people who worked in the Dharavi, etc., said she doesn't get anything. So it varies from person to person. How much of an outsiderness can you keep? Again, time comes into play. Somebody the other day was saying how Naipaul writing in an area of darkness was great, but the other two books, Thousand Mutinies and all, were terrible. So a person gets older, he's still an outsider, comes in, or she comes in and looks at a place, and because they've changed, their acuity shifts and changes. The mythologies, again, keep shifting. You can pay attention to mythology. Sometimes it's good to look at a place bare, like the photographer saying, there is no place. I'm not interested in the mythologies. I'm interested in how light falls on a chair against a wallpaper. So it can vary.
I think our time's run out. Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you for being a wonderful panel. This was fun.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiki.
Thanks, everybody.